The rain had turned the mountain road outside Blackwater Ridge into a ribbon of mud when Nora Whitmore found herself trapped inside an abandoned roadside diner, surrounded by three men who had spent weeks believing she was an easy target. While outside, their phones recorded every humiliating second for a private audience they thought could never reach them. Marcus Vale, the loudest of the group, slammed Nora's phone onto the counter and sneered, "You should have minded your own business." But Nora simply looked at the security camera above the kitchen door and replied calmly, "You should have checked who owns this place before you walked in." Nora had arrived in Blackwater Ridge only 3 weeks earlier, introducing herself as a freelance restoration specialist, hired to examine several neglected properties around the old mining district. And because she spoke softly, dressed plainly, and spent most evenings working alone, the locals quickly assumed she was another harmless outsider who knew nothing about the town's secrets. What nobody knew was that Nora had chosen Blackwater Ridge because a strange property dispute had led her there. And the more records she examined, the more often one family name appeared beside missing funds, falsified permits, and abandoned businesses that had mysteriously changed ownership overnight. The family at the center of those records belonged to Conrad Voss, a respected businessman who sponsored local charities, donated equipment to the volunteer fire department, and smiled warmly whenever cameras were pointed at him. Yet Nora discovered that several former property owners had vanished from town after refusing to sign suspicious contracts, while an old ledger hidden inside a condemned railway office suggested that someone had been moving stolen machinery through the valley under the protection of legitimate shipping companies. When Nora photographed the documents, she received an anonymous message that read, "Stop digging before the mountain buries you." And instead of frightening her away, the warning convinced her that she had finally found what she was looking for. The next morning, Nora met an elderly mechanic named Samuel Reed at a small garage near the river, and after listening carefully to her questions, he revealed that his brother had disappeared 12 years earlier after confronting Conrad Voss about equipment being transported through a locked tunnel beneath the abandoned Blackwater mine. Samuel handed Nora an old brass key and whispered, "Your problem isn't that you're asking too many questions, Nora. It's that someone already knows every question you're going to ask." And before she could respond, a dark sedan stopped across the street, forcing Samuel to abruptly end the conversation and order her to leave through the rear door. Nora followed the instructions, but deliberately took a different route home, eventually discovering that the sedan had followed her for nearly 6 miles, and when she reached the farmhouse she had rented, she found the front door slightly open even though she clearly remembered locking it. Inside, nothing appeared stolen, but a single envelope rested on her kitchen table, containing a photograph of the old mine entrance and a handwritten message that said, "Midnight, beneath the water tower, come alone." And Nora stared at it for several seconds before quietly saying, "If you wanted me alone, you wouldn't have left me a warning." At midnight, she went to the water tower anyway, but instead of entering the abandoned maintenance building, Nora concealed herself behind a stack of rusted pipes and watched Marcus and 2 other men arrive with a frightened local contractor, demanding that he hand over a flash drive containing records from the Voss shipping company. Nora secretly recorded the conversation, but before she could leave, a hand grabbed her shoulder, and Marcus whispered, "You really should have stayed invisible," only for Nora to turn around and answer, "And you really should have checked whether I came alone." The lights of several vehicles suddenly appeared beyond the trees, but they weren't police cars, and they weren't members of Voss's security team either, because a group of federal investigators stepped from the darkness carrying search warrants and evidence bags, while Samuel Reed emerged behind them holding the original mine records that Nora had spent days searching for. Marcus stared at the approaching agents in disbelief and shouted, Who called them? While Nora calmly lifted the small recorder hidden inside her jacket and said, "You did, the moment you started talking." Conrad Voss arrived minutes later, furious and confident that his influence would protect him. But that confidence disappeared when investigators presented him with photographs, financial records, vehicle tracking data, and the recorded conversation from the water tower. While Samuel identified the tunnel where his brother had once discovered the illegal shipments, Voss tried to blame everything on Marcus, but the investigators already had enough evidence to connect him to years of fraudulent property transfers and stolen equipment. And when he finally looked at Nora, she told him, "You spent years convincing people that nobody would ever challenge you, but arrogance leaves fingerprints everywhere." By sunrise, Blackwater Ridge was surrounded by investigators. Several warehouses had been sealed. Financial accounts connected to the Voss operation were frozen, and the people who had spent years looking away from suspicious activity were finally being questioned. While Marcus and his friends faced consequences for their own actions after the recording from the diner and the water tower became part of the evidence. Nora returned to Samuel's garage that afternoon, placed the brass key on his workbench and said, "Your brother deserved the truth." To which Samuel quietly replied, "So did this town." Nora eventually stood on the ridge overlooking the valley as sunlight broke through the clouds, realizing that the woman who had arrived believing she was simply investigating a property mystery had uncovered something much larger, and although the experience had left scars she would never forget, she understood that courage wasn't about never being afraid, but about refusing to let fear decide what you did next. She looked toward the distant mine entrance and smiled before walking back toward town, knowing that the truth had finally been dragged into the light. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.